Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. I just want to let some of you know that after last week's video, I am okay. You got me worried though. You did. Some of you got me worried. For anyone that hasn't got a clue what I'm talking about, last week's video, the name of the person, apparently you're not supposed to say that name out loud because apparently if you say it out loud, it's really bad luck. And I said it out loud like a billion times in last week's video. And I filmed that video on Friday the 13th, which is just like double the bad energy. So I just wanted to reassure some of you, I am okay. Nothing bad happened. However, I am not going to be saying the name of last week's perpetrator out loud again, or at least not for a very long time. But some of you got me worried, you did. Bloody hell. So today's case, the second of the third truly creepy, disturbing cases, and oh my god, today's case, the moment I heard about this case, it has stayed with me. Today's case is a horror film. Like truly, I have to remind myself all the time with today's case that it is real. It just feels so fictitious to me, today's case. It's so creepy. And for all of my Criminal Minds fans out there, because I know there's quite a few of you, today's case really reminds me of an episode from Criminal Minds. And I'm pretty sure that the episode is in season 5. I don't know what episode number it is, but in the episode of Criminal Minds, there is a female unsub and she abducts women off the street and paralyzes them and dresses them up as dolls, puts makeup on them, and I'm pretty sure that she puts them around a table and they have like a tea party or something, and she adds these young women to her doll collection. Do any of you know what episode I am talking about? Well, today's case is basically kind of that. I know, truly disturbing. Today we are going to be talking about the case of Anatoly Moscovin. Anatoly was obsessed with the dead, and one of his favorite things to do was walk around graveyards. And he liked to collect dolls. And some of the dolls were actually dolls, but then some of the dolls were not real dolls, if you know what I mean. And yeah, that is all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say too much more in this intro, so let's just jump in. I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is Love and Pies. So you guys know by now, autumn is my favorite season. I mentioned a couple of videos back that I actually prefer the rain more than the sun. I couldn't get over how many of you agreed. And when it is autumn, I love things that I can cozy up to. I love to put on a candle. I love it when it's dark outside. And this is where Love and Pies comes in perfectly, because you all know by now how amazing Love and Pies is. It is a free-to-play mobile game that has an incredibly heartwarming story. You play as single mom Amelia Green, who has just taken over her family cafe after her mom has mysteriously disappeared. And the storyline is truly incredible. There are so many twists and turns. There is lots of juicy secrets to uncover. There is so much drama, but you also get to build a thriving business, and you bake tasty treats along the way, like apple pies and cookies and hot chocolate. It definitely makes me a bit hungry. Like seriously, this game gives me all the cozy autumn vibes. So if you don't play Love and Pies, definitely check it out. However, I know so many of you play it already. I love seeing all of your comments about what level you're on, and I just love that we have this little Love and Pies community here. And now is a really good time to check it out, because Love and Pies have their Halloween event going on, and I love anything Halloween. The event is run by Ed Wiener. You get that right. And if you collect enough pumpkin cookies, you can get your hands on some incredibly unique Halloween decorations, because that is another part of this game. You get to decorate your own cafe. And so far I have collected the cursed kitchen counter and also the magical bookshelf. And then the next thing on my list to collect is the dreadful doorway. And that is what the dreadful doorway is going to look like. And I know that some of you already have this. I know I'm going to see comments, oh Danielle, I already have the dreadful doorway. Well, you know what? I am jealous, but I know that I will have it very soon. And there is just so many autumn vibes going on in the game right now. It is just the perfect time to start playing Love and Pies. And if you wanted to check out Love and Pies for yourself, you can download the game by using my link in the description box. And the game is completely free to download. And by using my link in my description box, it really does help out this channel, because it tells Love and Pies that you came from this video. Thank you again to Love and Pies for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you guys watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's spooky case. Anatoly Moscovin was born on the 1st of September 1966, making him a Virgo. And we haven't actually done a Virgo case in a very long time. There was a period of time where I was doing Virgos like every other week, so I had to give all of you Virgos a rest out there, but today's case is a Virgo. And he grew up in the city of Nichny? Oh my god, I cannot pronounce this place to save my life. And I've looked up how to pronounce it. Nizhny in Novgorod, Russia, where he was an only child to parents Yuri and Elvira. Now, Anatoly growing up can be best described as a child genius. He was incredibly intelligent. He was always the smartest kid in his class. He spent most of his time reading books, and I'm talking textbooks. Like, he would read textbooks, not like children's books, textbooks. And unfortunately, as often can be the stereotype, because Anatoly was so book smart, he wasn't always the best in social situations. He had a tendency to isolate himself from his peers. He struggled to make friends. He was just extremely socially awkward, and he would spend a lot of time on his own. And his parents often worried about him. They thought that his interests were a little bit odd. They didn't think that he was a, quote, normal child. But Anatoly, he was quite happy. He was quite happy spending time on his own. He was quite happy poring over his books. He loved being in his own little world, and he wasn't harming anybody, and he just liked to be on his own. He liked doing his own thing. However, when Anatoly was in 3rd grade, so he was about 8 or 9 years old at this point, something absolutely awful happened to him. Because one day when he was walking home from school, he was snatched off the street by an older man, dragged into some bushes and sexually assaulted. And then he was just left in the bushes with bruises from head to toe, which is absolutely awful. And Anatoly never told anyone about this attack. He never told his parents, his teachers, no one. And he kept it a secret for pretty much the rest of his life. So now we get to Anatoly when he's approximately 12 years old. And what happens to him when he is 12? Oh my god, this really did mess him up for life. Like, truly, this had a significant impact on him for the rest of his life. And I think if this one thing didn't happen, then the whole of today's case wouldn't have happened. So one day, Anatoly was walking around his town and he was knocking on doors to ask if anyone had any recycling, because he was doing this like school project that was clearly about the environment and cleaning up and recycling. So he was going door to door asking any of his neighbors, anybody in his town, if they had any recycling for him. And then he came across this one house, and it seemed like something strange and unusual was going on inside. He could clearly see like through the windows. So Anatoly, being curious, he walked up to this house and he realized that the door was open. So again, being curious, he peered inside, and what he saw shocked him to his core, because he came across a large group of men. There was approximately 20 to 30 men, all stood in a circle, and they were wearing black robes and suits, and they were almost chanting in a language that Anatoly didn't know. And if you ask me, this kind of sounds like a cult, but it turns out it wasn't a cult. I mean, maybe it was, who knows? But it was actually a funeral, because this group of people in the black robes, like they were stood in a circle, in the middle was an open casket of a young girl. And inside was an 11-year-old girl called Natasha Petrova. And Natasha, wow, Natasha becomes very significant to Anatoly. So Natasha had died from a freak accident, really. She was only 11 years old when she died, and her house was under construction. One day she just had a bath, and she stepped out of the bath and stepped on an exposed wire, and this electrocuted her, and the electric shock was so strong that it took her life. And Anatoly did know about the story of Natasha and how she had died, and it was such a tragic accident that I'm pretty sure the whole town probably knew about this horrible situation where this 11-year-old girl tragically died. So Anatoly had heard about the story of Natasha, so he knew who Natasha Natasha was. So Anatoly is still peering around the door and he sees all of these people in the robes stood around Natasha. And then all of a sudden, the men in the robes, they notice Anatoly watching. And everything that happens now happened so quickly that Anatoly didn't even really get a chance to think, because the men that saw him rushed over to Anatoly and grabbed him and dragged him over to the open casket. And the mother of Natasha starts shouting at Anatoly saying, "Come here, come here." But before Anatoly had even a chance to respond or like run away, one of the men in the robes dragged him closer, got the back of Anatoly's head and forced his head down into the open casket towards Natasha's dead body and forced Anatoly to kiss Natasha's forehead 3 times. And I'm like, what the bloody hell? Why the hell would you force a child to kiss the dead body of another child? And Anatoly didn't want to do it, but he was essentially forced into doing it. This man in the robes had the back of his head and was literally forcing him down onto Natasha's body. So Anatoly felt like he had to kiss Natasha. Even though Anatoly was saying, no, 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 I don't want to. He felt like he had no other choice. So Anatoly kissed Natasha's forehead 3 times, and he has recalled this experience of touching his lips to her waxy face, and it completely traumatized him. However, this traumatic event is not over, because after Anatoly was forced to kiss Natasha's forehead, Natasha's mom comes rushing over again, and she's holding 2 rings. I know. What the hell? She places one of the rings on Anatoly's ring finger and then places the other ring on Natasha's ring finger. And then the men in robes kind of gather round again and they perform a ceremony. They then tell Anatoly that Natasha is now his wife. I know, what the hell, Natasha? First of all, is an 11-year-old child, but Natasha is dead. The ceremony that the men in the robes had just carried out was apparently a wedding ceremony. Anatoly was given a basket full of apples and he was told not to tell anyone about the ceremony for at least 40 days. And then Anatoly was sent on his way. What the hell just happened? Did Anatoly truly get married to Natasha, who is a dead child? Now, apparently in some cultures, this can actually happen. I mean, the marriage is not legal or anything, but I've read that in some cultures that if a child or a young person dies before they are married, a wedding-like ceremony is performed at their funeral. So the person that has died still has ties to someone that is living. And the young person that has died can sometimes be buried in wedding clothes. So I think that this is what happened to Anatoly, but it completely freaked him out. It traumatized him to his core because he's only 12 and he was panicking. He was thinking, what the hell just happened? Do I actually have a wife now? And you can imagine that that would completely mess up a 12-year-old. And it really did mess him up. It had a significant impact on him. It really did change the trajectory of his life, really, because now from this moment forward, Anatoly was obsessed with the dead and he started to become obsessed with graveyards. He started going to graveyards all of the time. He wanted to read all of the headstones. He would also sit at gravestones and try to communicate with the dead. He would also visit Natasha's grave all the time because Anatoly, at 12 years old, he actually did think that Natasha was his wife. And because he believed that Natasha was his wife, he wanted to be with Natasha all of the time. And because Anatoly was visiting Natasha's grave so much, Natasha would quite often frequent his dreams. And he started to have a ton of very vivid dreams and nightmares about Natasha. So now Anatoly truly thought that he was being haunted by his dead wife. And at first, when he started having these dreams, he actually quite enjoyed them because he felt connected to Natasha and he felt like that was the only way he was going to see his dead wife. But then as time went on, he was having these dreams for about a year. As time went on, they started to really freak him out. And Anatoly told his parents about the dreams, and his parents became very concerned that he was having so many vivid dreams and nightmares about this dead girl. So they took him to see a doctor. But the doctor was not that much help. The doctor actually said that it was Anatoly's natural transition into puberty. No. He is traumatized by the fact that he was forced into marrying a dead girl. And the doctor recommended that Anatoly needed to relax a little bit more, so he should drink some more tea. So Anatoly did as the doctor said, he drank some more tea. However, unsurprisingly, the tea didn't bloody work, and he kept having dreams. So in the end, Anatoly decided to take on a new tactic. In his dreams, he asked Natasha what he had to do to get rid of her. And Natasha instructed Anatoly that the only way to get rid of her was to pass her on to another young boy. And in order to do this, Anatoly would have to perform a weird little ceremony, which somehow required Anatoly to steal a tooth from the young boy that he wanted to transfer Natasha to. What does a tooth have to do with anything? And I know what you're probably thinking. Well, there's no way that he's going to be able to steal another person's tooth, but unbelievably, he does. I don't know how he does it. Now he's 13. At this time, haven't all of your baby teeth fallen out by then? Like, I don't know. Maybe they haven't. I don't know. But that's the only explanation as to how he was able to steal somebody else's tooth, is if that other person that he stole the tooth from, they still had a baby tooth and it was falling out, and maybe they pulled it out in class and Anatoly was like, give me that. I don't know. But he somehow managed to get a tooth off another young boy, and he performed this strange ceremony that Natasha had instructed him to. And after he performed this ceremony, Natasha never haunted his dreams ever again. It actually worked. So now that Natasha was no longer haunting his dreams, Anatoly threw himself back into his studies. And now Anatoly is moving into his teenage years, and he's very intelligent, he's getting very good grades, and he's living his best life. Natasha is gone, he's over all of that. He went on to attend Moscow State University, where he studied philology. And I had never heard of philology before. When I say that, I just want to say philology. And basically philology, oh my God. Basically philology is the study of the history of languages and how certain languages and certain texts have evolved over time. That's basically what I understood about it anyway from my brief research on philology. And Anatoly loved languages, and he was very good at languages as well. And he was very interested in dead languages. He's obsessed with the dead, so does that surprise anybody? And he was obsessed with all things history, especially Celtic history, and he learned a ton of languages whilst he was at university. He actually learned how to speak 13 different languages. 13 different languages, and I assume one of them must have been Latin, like it has to have been. And whilst he was studying at university, he also developed another interest, and that was into Luciferianism. I swear this video is just full of words that Danielle cannot pronounce. Luciferianism. And Luciferianism is quite often compared to Satanism. However, they are slightly different. Luciferianism or Luciferians, is that how you would say it? Oh my God, I can't talk. Luciferians worship Lucifer instead of Satan, and they believe that the characteristics of Lucifer should be admired and emulated, including autonomy, personal pride, knowledge, the pursuit of prosperity, delight in carnal pleasures. And if you have anything more to add on Luciferianism, because I am no expert, please let me know in the comments. But Anatoly became a Luciferian, and he got involved with a group of people that were very obsessed with all things occult. And when he told his new group of friends about his experience with Natasha and the whole fact that he got married to a dead girl, they admired him so much. And Anatoly was welcomed in with open arms, and this is also where he started to learn about dark magic and casting spells. And they would also perform rituals with animals. And I swear, this just sounds like last week's case. And they started to communicate with the dead. And as soon as Anatoly joined this group, he took a vow of celibacy for the rest of his life, which I think everyone else in the group did that as well as abstaining from alcohol, drugs, and smoking. And Anatoly would take a lot of the teachings and the morals from this group, from Luciferianism, and he would take it forward for the rest of his life, but not in a good way. And then after he graduated university, Anatoly took a job as a lecturer in Celtic studies in a linguistic university. And he made very good use of his 13 languages that he knew. He published many highly regarded papers and translations. He also published a Russian to English dictionary. Anatoly wrote a bloody dictionary. Who the hell writes a dictionary? And some have described Anatoly as like that stereotypical, like nutty professor. He was just obsessed with learning. He had a personal collection of over 60,000 books. And I don't know where he kept all these books, because 60,000 books, that is a lot of books. And he just loved educating himself. He actually did learn a lot of things himself, and he loved to teach others as well. However, on the flip side of that, he was very arrogant. People often found him difficult to work with. He was definitely a lone wolf. He was not a team player. He just strikes me as somebody that probably does think that they are above others because they are so academically intelligent. So in the end, Anatoly quit his job as a lecturer and he became a freelance journalist. And a lot of his freelancing work was translation. But he also found a new passion, and that was writing obituaries. And that pretty much is the perfect job for Anatoly because he's obsessed with the dead. He also became known as an expert on graveyards, because graveyards, if you remember, as a child, they were one of his favorite places to hang out. Well, that has not changed. And personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with hanging out at graveyards or walking around them or even liking to walk around them, because side note, I actually quite like walking around graveyards. That probably sounds very weird, doesn't it? But like when I come across a graveyard that's like a really like old graveyard, I do quite like to walk around it, and I quite like looking at the gravestones and looking at their names and like seeing when they were alive and thinking about the kind of life that they had. Does that make me weird? But Anatoly became known as an expert in graveyards. Anatoly actually traveled all over the country to visit graveyards, and he was hired as a freelancer to write articles on the graveyards that he would visit. And in the early 2000s, Anatoly is in his 30s at this point. He was hired by a university research team to make a thorough document of every single dead person in every single grave in over 700 graveyards all over Russia. And if you think about the average graveyard, they have hundreds, if not maybe even up to 1,000 graves. I don't know how big these graveyards are, but if we're talking hundreds of graves in every graveyard, that is hundreds of thousands of graves of people that he needs to document. That is a monster of a task. However, I think Anatoly was jumping for joy when he got this job, because this was the perfect job for him, because he already did this. And now someone was hiring him to do what he loved to do as a hobby. And Anatoly took this very seriously. Like, this was a life or death mission for him. And he took it so seriously that over a 2-year period, which is how long it took him to do it, he decided that he was going to visit a new graveyard every single day. He was going to live and breathe graveyards. He was going to do nothing else with his life than go around these graveyards and make his document, writing down every single person that was in every single grave. And he decided to do this whole thing on foot. And I don't know why he decided to do it on foot, because I'm like, why? You've got to do 700 graveyards. Why are you doing it all on foot? So Anatoly decided to walk all over Russia, and he went to a different graveyard every single day. And Anatoly was walking approximately 20 miles every single day. And then as soon as he would get to the graveyard, he would spend hours poring over every single grave, writing all of the details down in his little notebook. And he did this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But that is not what is creepy about all of this, because Anatoly needed somewhere to sleep every single night. So where did he decide to sleep? In the graveyards. I'm sorry, I like to walk around graveyards, but you could not pay me to sleep in a graveyard. But Anatoly, he felt close to the dead and he slept in the graveyards, but that is still not the creepiest thing that happened. On many occasions, if Anatoly saw an empty coffin that was being prepared for the next day or the following day for a funeral, Anatoly would sleep in the coffin. No. I cannot think of anything creepier than that. And Anatoly, he would get by begging for food. He would ask locals for food. I even read that he was drinking water from puddles. And quite often he was questioned by police about what he was doing because, of course, it looks very creepy and suspicious. This random man spending hours in a graveyard, writing all of these notes down and then sleeping in a graveyard. And then also visitors to the graveyards would often assault him as well because they wanted him away from their loved one's grave. There was even one time when Anatoly was assaulted by a group of mourners. Anatoly was dragged into their car and was abandoned at the side of the road and threatened to never go to that town again. But anyway, Anatoly finally finished his 2-year graveyard travels and he moved back in with his parents, who he had lived with prior to the 2 years. And in 2003, something pretty significant happened for Anatoly, and that is that he entered into his first romantic relationship. Now, if you remember, back in university, he took a vow of celibacy, but now he's entering into his first romantic relationship, and this was with a woman called Julia. Julia and Anatoly, they're very similar actually, and they hit it off immediately. After only a few weeks of knowing each other, Julia said to Anatoly that they were spiritual soulmates, and that she wanted to enter into a non-sexual relationship with Anatoly. Now, this was music to Anatoly's ears. This is exactly what he wanted. He didn't want sex. He didn't want anything like that. He just wanted companionship. And it wasn't too long after they started dating that they decided that they wanted a child together. Now it's like, okay, so are we gonna get romantic, you know? But no, they decided that they didn't want to have sex. They didn't want to have a child that way. They were going to adopt. And Anatoly was thrilled about having a child because he had always wanted a daughter for himself, and this is very significant. So they started to go through the adoption process, but the application was denied. And this was mainly due to the fact that Anatoly was a freelancer. He didn't have a steady income. He still lived with his parents. Julia and Anatoly, they didn't even live together. So there was also concern about how they were going to raise a child together, not living together. So they couldn't adopt a child, and they were both heartbroken about this, and this put a real strain on their relationship, and they soon broke up. So Anatoly went back to living his isolated life at his parents', and he was absolutely distraught that he wasn't going to be able to adopt a daughter. Anatoly at this point in his life was 100% set on the idea of him having a child and of the idea of him having a daughter. And I think the reason that Anatoly was so set on having a daughter was because of Natasha. Even though he had moved on from Natasha, Natasha wasn't haunting his dreams anymore. I still think that he wasn't completely over her. Natasha really did consume his whole life. It really did set him on this path that he is about to go down. So Anatoly proposes the idea to his parents that if Anatoly got a stable job, he wanted to adopt a young girl on his own. And he was really hoping that his parents would be supportive in this, maybe help him raise his daughter, because obviously he's living with them. But his parents shoot him down. They couldn't understand why he wanted a daughter so badly. And Anatoly was furious. He was so angry, especially with his mom. In fact, he even threatened his mom that he was going to use black magic and contact the dead and get their spirits to haunt his mom for the rest of her life. But Anatoly's mom, she didn't even flinch. And then in April of 2003, Anatoly Anatoly's parents left for their summer vacation. Every year, Anatoly's parents would travel around Russia to different countries for 6 months of the year. From April to October, every single year, they were on vacation. And I don't even know if you can class that as a vacation because they are literally gone for half the year. So for 6 months, every single year, Anatoly was even more isolated and lonely. Because Anatoly, apart from his interests in graveyards, he didn't really have anything else in his life. And Anatoly kept dwelling on the idea of having a daughter. He kept thinking, if I had a daughter, I wouldn't be so lonely. If I had a daughter, I would have something to do with my life. Now we move on to the part of the case that makes Anatoly Moskvin so infamous. Because Anatoly decided that if he wasn't allowed to adopt a daughter, he was going to dig one up. You heard that right. Anatoly was so obsessed with the dead that he actually didn't care if the daughter that he had was alive or dead. His fascination with Natasha had started from 12 years old. He was now in his 30s and he could never get the idea of this little dead girl out of his mind. He was convinced that he could communicate with the dead. Therefore, why did it matter that his daughter was dead? He would still be able to communicate with her. And given that he was an expert, like literally an expert on graveyards around the local area because he had gone to them for 2 years and he also went to graveyards in his spare time anyway, he decided that he was going to travel to one of his favourite graveyards and dig up a young child. But this wouldn't be one child that he would dig up, which is bad enough as it is. No, this would become a decade-long obsession. The number of graves that he disturbed went into the hundreds. I don't even have words to prepare you for what is about to come. So we get to May of 2003, and I just want to point out how quickly all of this has escalated. Because at the beginning of 2003, that's when he started his relationship with Julia, and that is when he wanted to adopt a child. So we are literally maximum 5 months later to him actually digging up a dead child. That is quick escalation. If I'm being honest, I think he was probably thinking about this before 2003, but I have no evidence of that. So late one night in May 2003, Anatoly arrived at one of his favourite graveyards and he starts to put his sick and twisted plans into action. He first locates a grave that meets his requirements. And his only requirement really was that the corpse had to be of a young girl like Natasha. So he went round the tombstones, he looked at all of the names, he looked at the date of birth, the date of death, until he finally stumbled on a grave that he liked the look of and that met his requirements. So he took out his shovel and he just started digging. He dug deeper and deeper until he finally reached the coffin. And he has said that this coffin was covered in crimson fabric that he had to move out of the way first. And then he finally got to the coffin and he pulled out his chisel and he started to make a hole in the wooden coffin approximately where the head would have been. And once the hole that he had made was big enough, he reached into the coffin and pulled out the body of a young girl. And once Anatoly had pulled out the corpse of this young girl, he realized that she was dressed in a white shirt, a black skirt. She had tights and shoes on. She also had very long hair. However, something else that he realized was that the body was in a very bad condition. So Anatoly dragged the body to a remote corner of the graveyard to inspect the body. He wanted to be able to come back and visit this corpse as often as he wanted because he wanted to treat this corpse like they were his daughter. But because the corpse was in such a bad condition, Anatoly realized that he was going to have to preserve the body in some sort of way. And this is when he decided that the only solution was to mummify the girl. And I'm just like, oh my God, how did this actually happen? And it's just so disgusting that he is disrupting her grave and pulling her out of her coffin. And I actually don't know how old this young girl is. And the mummification process is to try and preserve the human body in its original form for as long as possible. It essentially involves drying out the body as much as possible, removing internal organs, sometimes stuffing the body to help keep its shape. And I'm sure there is a lot more that goes into that. That is just a very quick and simple explanation on mummification because I am no expert. However, Anatoly was. Of course he was. Anatoly had actually expected that he might need to preserve the body that he was going to dig up, so he actually brought with him the proper equipment to start the mummification process. Anatoly pulled out a load of baking soda, a load of salt. He then poured this into old tights and socks and started wrapping this around the body in order to dehydrate the corpse. And when Anatoly had finished this process, which I can only assume took him a pretty long time, after he had finished this process, he then reburied the girl in an abandoned grave that belonged to an old grandmother. And I don't know what he means by an abandoned grave. Does he mean that the grandmother that was supposed to be in there, was she not in there anymore? Or does he mean abandoned because no one visited the grave anymore? I just don't know. But he reburied this young girl in this abandoned grave. And over the next few weeks, Anatoly would keep going back to the graveyard most nights, dig up the little girl again, and he would change over the tights of salt and baking soda each time to carry on the mummification process because it takes a very long time. And finally, after a few weeks, Anatoly had his very own mummified little girl. And almost every single night, Anatoly would go to this graveyard, dig the girl back up, and spend the night with her. And then he would rebury her, go home, and then on the night, he would do the whole process again. It's just unbelievable. So a couple of months go by, and Anatoly is enjoying going to the graveyard every single night, digging up the corpse, spending the night with the corpse, and then reburying the corpse. However, after a couple of months, this whole process, it was getting tiresome. So what did Anatoly decide to do? He decided that the best idea was to bring a body home with him. So you would think that he would bring home the body of the girl that he has already mummified. Oh no, he wants a fresh corpse. So on the 25th of July 2003, Anatoly decides to dig up a second child. This time the body was of a very young girl. Again, I don't know her exact age, but it is thought that she was under 3 years old, and she was so small that she could fit in Anatoly's backpack. So when Anatoly got home, he lay the little girl on a table and he started the mummification process from the comfort of his own home. So after this corpse was mummified, Anatoly decided to take things a little bit further. He had made a wax face and placed it on the mummified little girl. He also dressed the girl in clothes to make the mummified corpse feel more like a real daughter. But was Anatoly content with this one corpse that he had at home? No, because after he got used to having this one corpse in his home, he wanted another one. So he went through the same process. He went to a graveyard, he picked a grave, he dug up a young girl, brought her home, started the mummification process. But then he still wasn't satisfied. He wanted another corpse, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. And as time passed, this is just so creepy, because now Anatoly had quite a few mummified human corpses in his home. He decided to make these corpses into his very own human doll collection. This is actually something that I haven't mentioned yet, but as a young child, Anatoly actually did collect dolls. It was one thing that he actually really liked, apart from graveyards. And now in his lonely adult life, he decided to take that doll collection to a whole nother sick and twisted level by having a human doll collection. And there are pictures of these dolls online, but just be aware that if you do Google this case, they are readily available. You can see them, and I will admit they are so creepy. I have seen them, especially the faces of these dolls. Oh god. So most of Anatoly's victims, or should I say corpses that he dug up, were of young girls between the ages of 3 and 12. He actually did dig up some adult women as well, but as soon as he dug them up, he realized that they were just too big. He wouldn't be able to carry them home. It was just going to be too much, so he reburied them. So all of the corpses that he had at home were between the ages of 3 and 12, so they were of various sizes. And in the end, Anatoly had collected as many as 20 to 30 corpses. I know, not just 1, 2, 5, no, 20 to 30 corpses he had in his home. And now he needs to make these corpses into dolls. And he started this process eerily by reading a book called How to Make Dolls, which I assume that book is not about human dolls. I assume it's just about like regular dolls, but oh. So he first wrapped their limbs in cloth to keep them intact. He would dress all of the mummies in various different clothes to give all of the different corpses different personalities. He would dress them in bright clothes. They would have tights and shoes on. He would put some wigs on some of them, hats, in order to give the girls, the corpses, or should I say dolls, faces. He would make those wax faces again, and he would put makeup on these wax faces. He would insert buttons into the eye sockets to make them look like eyes. He would sometimes actually use eyes from dolls, like toy dolls. He would take the eyes out of the toy dolls and put them in the eye sockets to make them look more lifelike. And then for the bodies where the head wouldn't stay in place, he would actually remove the head from the corpses and replace the head with a doll's head, making this creepy doll human hybrid. It's just something that I'm struggling to picture. Like, I really am. Even though I've seen the images, I'm still just struggling to even imagine this. Like, how is this real? Like, truly, how is this case real? In order to keep the shape of their bodies, he would stuff them with various objects, such as rags and cloths. Sometimes he would also stuff personal items that belonged to the child that he had found in the grave of that child. He would sometimes stuff those personal items inside the body. One girl still had her hospital tag attached to her with the date and cause of death on the tag, and Anatoly had inserted that tag inside of her. And this just shows how creepy this is, because a tag is what, this big? Like not very big, is it? That tag is not going to help a body stay intact. That is not going to be stuffing. Oh God, I hate even talking like this. But he clearly just wanted that tag inside of that corpse because it belonged to that corpse and it gave that corpse personality. There was also inside another corpse a dried up human heart inside of her, and I don't know if it was her own heart. I can't imagine it was, because why would you need to state that someone's own heart is inside of them? You wouldn't, would you? So I can imagine it was somebody else's heart, maybe the heart of another corpse that he had in his home. Oh my God, it's just so sick. But I still haven't said the worst of it, no, because in some of the girls, he actually placed music boxes inside of them. So when you would squeeze them, a little lullaby would start playing from inside of them. And that is just so creepy. And then in another girl, he had inserted a voice box inside of her, so when she was squeezed, she read out a sentence that said, quote, "Teddy bear loves honey very much." And I don't mean this to sound insensitive, but it's literally like Build-A-Bear. Crazy that he's literally just mix and matching these dolls, but they're human, and he's inserting his own little music boxes and voice boxes. So then after Anatoly had turned all of these corpses into human dolls, what did he do next? Well, he played with them, of course. He would interact with all of the young girls. He pretended that they were alive. They were not dolls. They were actually alive. Remember, he can communicate with the dead. He would hold little tea parties for them all. He would sit them all around. He would serve up tea and dinner, even though he was the only one that could eat. I am sorry, this is so sick and twisted. He would sit and watch cartoons with them because he truly believed that these dolls could watch the TV because he had inserted eyes into them so they could clearly see. He sang to the girls. He had conversations with them. He answered their questions. And God knows what those questions were that these dolls were apparently asking him. He would also read books to them on child raising and how much of a good father he was going to be to all of them. But then this next thing is probably the most sick. But he would throw birthday parties for every single doll that he had in his home because he had dug up all of these corpses. He had read their gravestone. So he knew when all of their birthdays were. And he had a calendar with all of their birthdays written on it. And he made sure that for every single birthday, they threw a birthday party. They would gather round, have a tea party. There would be cake. All I can keep thinking about, because all of these girls that he has in his home are children to parents that are grieving. And all I can keep thinking about is when it is their birthday, their parents are probably mourning and grieving, yet he is there with the corpse of their child celebrating their birthday. On top of this, he created backstories for every single girl. He would make up fake ancestry. He would give them all personality traits. He even created his own little language that was made up that only himself and his girls could speak. And this really does just remind me of a child. He really is acting like a child because it's very common for children to almost make up a language, to have their own language with their toys or maybe an imaginary friend or even their own language between siblings or friends. That is something so common for children, and Anatoly is acting like that. So Anatoly was collecting his dolls whilst his parents were away. And we know that his parents go away for 6 months every single year. But then when it comes to October, they return. And guess what? It is now October 2003. So Anatoly's parents have returned home. And you might be wondering, well, what the hell happened when his parents returned home? Surely they noticed all of these corpses all over their home. But unbelievably, they didn't. When Anatoly's parents returned home from their vacation, they noticed that Anatoly had all of a sudden started collecting life-size dolls, even though there was between 20 and 30 life-size dolls around the home. And all of a sudden, their 30-something-year-old son is playing with these life-size dolls. They just shrugged it off. They knew that he did like to collect dolls. He had done that from a very young age, so they just thought that his obsession had clearly gotten worse. They didn't ask any more questions. Now, I don't know if I believe this. I'm always skeptical though, you know that. Because I have seen pictures of these dolls and they don't really look like dolls. I mean, they don't exactly look like human children either, but they don't look like dolls. They don't look normal. And also, did they not smell? I mean, I haven't got a clue about the mummification process. Does that take out some of the smell? But apparently, neighbours have actually complained about the smell coming from the home. So clearly, the mummification can't take out all of the smell because these dolls did smell. Because of course they bloody smell. There's 20 to 30 corpses in this home. So I don't know. I don't want to accuse Anatoly's parents of doing anything because I actually do think that they're innocent in all of this. But I just feel like as parents, maybe you should ask some questions. And like I said, neighbours had actually complained about the smell. And whenever the neighbours would come over to the home, clearly to visit Anatoly's parents, they would comment on the dolls. Because who wouldn't? If you walked into a home and there was 30 life-size dolls around the home, surely you're going to comment. But what is just so creepy is that Anatoly gave his parents one of his dolls, which of course was a human corpse, and he placed this doll in their bedroom. So every single night when his parents went to bed, there was a human corpse in their room, like looking over them. And the years went by, and every single year when Anatoly's parents would go on their 6-month vacation, Anatoly would keep adding to his doll collection. Anatoly would always go back to graveyards and he would dig up more children to bring back home and make into human dolls. And what is just so sick is that he would actually scour obituaries so that he could see if any young girls had passed away recently. He then also started to try and learn about the girls that he was stealing, their history, their background, find out what caused their death. And once he had found a new corpse to steal, he would go to their grave and he would actually sleep on their grave for a number of nights, and he would start to communicate to the body in the ground, and he would ask the young girl, the corpse, permission for him to dig them up and take them home, clearly trying to make himself feel better about the sick and twisted things that he is doing. And whenever Anatoly's doll collection got too big, or sometimes he would actually get bored of particular dolls, he would either place those dolls in the garage and never think about them ever again, or he would take the young girl back to her grave and rebury her and just go out and find himself a new victim. And I wish I could tell you more about the victims in today's video. However, nearly all of the identities of the victims are either unknown or have been withheld from the public. However, I do know the story of one of his victims, and this was a little girl named Olga, and her story is just so tragic because was in the spring of 2002. Olga Shanova was just a 10-year-old girl. She was living her best life. She was so happy. Her parents absolutely adored her. And one day she was allowed to walk to her grandma's house for the very first time on her own. Now, her grandma's house was literally only a block away, so it wasn't that far. However, tragically, when Olga got to the apartment block, she came across a violent drug addict that forced her against the wall and tried to steal the earrings out of Olga's ears. However, because Olga tried to escape, this person picked up a metal bar and smashed it over Olga's head, and this tragically killed her. And then this violent, disgusting human being took Olga's body and hid it in the attic of the apartment block, and then he fled. And Olga would actually become a missing person for 5 months before her remains were found. And oh my god, if that is not tragic enough. So in October of 2002, she was obviously found and she was finally laid to rest. And obviously her parents were so distraught because they had let her walk to her grandma's house for the first time on her own, and then this happens. The whole community was devastated. It was just such a violent murder of a child. So all of this is bad enough anyway. But then a few months later in 2003, Anatoly dug up the body of Olga and brought her back to his house to become one of his dolls. And then as the months passed, Olga's parents would always visit her grave. However, what is just so heartbreaking is that they were visiting an empty grave. And Olga's parents, they had no idea that she wasn't in her grave. Anatoly was very good at covering his tracks. However, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. Because as more time passes, strange things started to happen around Olga's grave. It started off small, but then it escalated. So it started off, Olga's parents found a wreath at Olga's grave and they didn't know who left it there. And then they started to find all of these suspicious, weird and creepy notes on her grave. And in these notes, the person writing the note would refer to Olga as their little girl, their precious girl. And this was really freaking out Olga's parents because they were like, who the hell keeps leaving this stuff at our daughter's grave? But then when it came to Olga's birthday and over holidays, gifts would be left at her grave. There would be more notes left on her grave on her birthday that said, today would have been your 6th year at school. And Olga's parents had absolutely no idea who was leaving these notes. And it turns out that it was Anatoly. Shocker. But Anatoly would do this with all of his victims. So he didn't just steal the bodies of these children. He also went further and tormented the families of these children. But Anatoly, he took it further because he thought that Olga deserved a nicer gravestone. So he left a note at Olga's grave threatening her parents. And he said in this note that if they didn't purchase a nicer gravestone for Olga, they would dig up her body and steal her. Which of course Anatoly has already done that. He has already dug up her body and stolen her, but Olga's parents do not know this. So Olga's parents, completely freaked out by this, they go to the police, but the police had no leads. They had nothing really to go on. So in the end, Olga's parents gave in to the demands and they bought Olga a nicer headstone. It just makes me so sick and so angry what Anatoly has done. I can't put it into words, but what he is doing is on another level of disrespect. And the big question that I have, that probably you have, is why is Anatoly even doing this in the first place? I mean, we obviously know that probably, I just want to stress this, probably his main motive is to have a daughter. Probably a daughter like Natasha. We know how much that experience traumatized him as a child. We also know that he is incredibly lonely and he wants company. And another big question that I think maybe some of you have, it definitely crossed my mind, was there a sexual motive behind all of this? Does Anatoly have any sexual interest in dead bodies, in these little girls? And it turns out, no, he didn't. At least I don't think he did. There is no evidence suggesting that there was any sexual motive behind any of these crimes. His only interest was really companionship. He also believed that he was doing a good thing. In his own sick and twisted way, he thought that he was giving these girls an extended life. He also thought that at some point in the future, whether that is using some sort of black magic or technology, there would be advancements in how to bring people back to life. And he thought that he was just looking after these girls until that time that they could be brought back to life. And this went on for years. It is crazy how long Anatoly is doing this. So 6 more years go by, and for most of the time he was just living a normal life. When his parents were home, he was just living with his parents, living a normal life. He was still a freelance writer. And we now get to the year 2009, and this is when social media really started to take off, and Anatoly basically became a blogger, and he would blog about graveyards. He wrote articles with titles like Great Walks Around Graveyards and What the Dead Said, and other researchers and academics in the field thought that his articles were amazing, like fantastic, really well researched, and no one had a clue what was actually going on behind closed doors. However, when we are in 2009, this is when things would start to kind of go downhill for Anatoly, because the police finally started to become suspicious as to what was going on. The police had started to get a ton of reports about graves being disturbed and just all of the strange things happening in the graveyards. I imagine people were reporting the gifts that were showing up, the flowers and the notes. And guess who the police went to talk to first? Anatoly Moscovin, but not as a suspect. No, the police wanted to go and talk to Anatoly because he was the local expert on graveyards. And the police thought that maybe Anatoly would be able to help them catch the person disturbing all of these graves, not knowing that it was Anatoly that was doing it. But instead, Anatoly actually became really defensive and refused to help the police. So the police were left thinking, that's a bit strange. Why doesn't he want to help us? But they didn't really think too much of it, and they were just left clueless as to who was disturbing these graves. So then a couple more years pass, and it is now 2011. Anatoly had been robbing graves for over 8 years at this point. And this is when the police start to become suspicious again, because this time around there had recently just been a terrorist attack in Moscow, and as a result of this there was a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment going around, and a lot of Muslim graves were being vandalized. And guess who joined in on the vandalism? Of course, Anatoly. He was going around vandalizing Muslim graves. He was spray painting over them. He was sometimes stealing things from the graves. The police wanted to catch who was doing this. So they set up a sting operation to catch whoever was doing it, and this is when Anatoly's 8 years of robbing graves would finally come to an end. Because on the 2nd of November 2011, police were monitoring one of the graveyards that kept being vandalized late at night. And who did they catch vandalizing a grave? Anatoly Moscovin. They arrest Anatoly right there and then, and they tell him that they're going to take him in for questioning on the vandalism. However, first they want to search his home for any more evidence of the vandalism. And Anatoly doesn't put up a fight. Like, he doesn't try and be defensive or anything like that. He allows the police to go to his home. And what the police walked into, they were not expecting. Let's just say they got the shock of their life. They thought that they were just going to go in and maybe find some empty spray can bottles, maybe some of the objects that had been stolen from the graves, etc. They walk into the house, and first of all, it is a mess. It looks like kind of like a hoarder's home. There's books everywhere, because you know how big his book collection is. There's just random objects like scattered around. They could tell that no one really cleaned around this house. It was just all unorganized. But the overwhelming thing that the police noticed was the smell. And the police were looking around the home and they didn't find any evidence of the vandalism. But they did come across Anatoly's life-size collection of dolls. And there was 29 in total scattered around the house. And the police were looking at these dolls and they just found them so weird. There was just something about them, and they thought he might be hiding something inside of these dolls. And the police decide to cut into one of these dolls. And this is when they discovered that this was no doll. This was a human corpse that had been mummified. And to say that the police were horrified would be an understatement, because I think we just all need to take a moment right now and realize that they have found 29 human corpses that had been mummified, and all of these corpses were young girls, children. This was the worst and most shocking, horrific discovery that the police had ever made. So of course an investigation was launched and the police collected as much evidence as they could, and they were so horrified by what they found, because they found out about the fact that everything that I've discussed, that Anatoly dressed up these human corpses, that he had stuffed their bodies, that he had placed buttons or dolls' eyes in their eye sockets, some of their heads had been replaced with other dolls, that music boxes and voice boxes had been inserted into some of these corpses. And oh my god, I can't even imagine the officer that made the discovery of the voice box that, if you remember, said, "Teddy bear loves honey very much." No, that is just too much. They also found doll making manuals and detailed notes from Anatoly about how he had gone about making his human doll collection. They found maps of all of the local graveyards, markings on these maps of the graves that he had robbed, photographs of all of the grave sites, plaques stolen from the gravestones. Police also managed to match footprints that were around the disturbed graves to the exact shoes that Anatoly would wear. They basically had a ton of evidence. And when Anatoly was questioned, because they had so much evidence, Anatoly didn't really see the point of hiding anything, and he pretty much gave a full confession. He confessed that for 8 years he had been robbing graves. Anatoly also confessed that he knew what he was doing was a crime. However, he believed that he had good intentions, that he was doing the right thing, and he truly believed that he was giving these girls a better home, and he did not show any remorse whatsoever. And then the police had the awful task of having to tell the parents of all of the children that Anatoly had stolen. The police had to tell the parents that this man had dug up their child and had made them into a human doll. The police had to tell the parents that the grave that they had been visiting all of these years was empty, that the person leaving those notes and the gifts, tormenting them for all of these years, was the exact same person that had stolen their child in the first place. But before they could tell the parents, they actually needed to identify all of the bodies, which they were able to do with the help of Anatoly, because obviously he knew all of the backgrounds and their names and everything, and he knew where he'd stolen all of these children from. And although the police only found 29 human dolls in Anatoly's home, after completing all of their investigation, they concluded that over the course of those 8 years when Anatoly was robbing graves, he desecrated more than 150 graves before later returning some of those children to their graves because he had got on board with them or he just didn't want them anymore. I don't know if he made all of those victims into human dolls. I don't know, because obviously some of them he did just dig up and then put straight back in the ground. But oh my god, 150 graves, 150 corpses he dug up and disturbed them in some kind of way. Now, news soon spread to the media, and as you can imagine, the details of this case, it spread like wildfire. Journalists crowded around Anatoly's apartment and they watched as each one of the bodies of the children were carried out, and the story made front pages of newspapers all over Russia. It became international news, and Anatoly Moskvin actually became the most hated man in Russia at the time. And as for Anatoly's parents, they were also ripped to shreds in the media. Now, Anatoly's parents have denied all knowledge of this. They said that they didn't know what was going on. They genuinely did think that these were actual dolls, but people didn't believe them. Anatoly's parents became completely shunned by the local community. They became extremely depressed and their health suffered because of it. His dad had a heart attack and his mom was hospitalized after having a breakdown. The two of them actually contemplated at one point taking their own lives because things had gotten so bad, but in the end they didn't. And then eventually the case went to trial and Anatoly pleaded guilty to 44 counts of abusing graves and dead bodies. However, his defense was that he took very good care of these girls, that he meant them no harm. And the families of all of Anatoly's victims were there during the trial and he was so disrespectful to them. He kept talking as if the victims were his. He kept referring to the victims as my girls. He also launched an attack on the parents, saying that they had abandoned their children when they needed them most, and that Anatoly had saved these children, that he had brought them home and given them a nice warm home to live in, and he took care of the children the way their parents should have. What he has done is just beyond despicable, and the victims' families were shouting out for life imprisonment or even the death penalty. However, it wasn't that simple. Because despite the horrific nature of his crimes, the only thing that Anatoly could be charged with was desecration of graves. He hadn't taken a life. All he had done was desecrate the graves, disturb the bodies, which I know just sounds so disrespectful in itself, doesn't it? And usually the charge of desecration of graves normally refers to vandalism. The law didn't include stealing a dead body. At least it didn't in Russia anyway. Obviously laws all over the world are very different. And in Russia, the charge of desecration of graves held a maximum prison sentence of only 5 years. However, in the end, the trial was put on hold. And it was determined that because of the nature of these crimes and how Anatoly had done everything, that he needed to go under a mental health evaluation to see if he was fit enough to even stand trial. And after going through this evaluation, Anatoly Moskvin was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and he was deemed unfit to stand trial. And therefore Anatoly was going to be held indefinitely in a psychiatric unit. And he was also ordered to pay $75,000 to each victim's family. And in the years that followed, Anatoly has been locked up in a psychiatric hospital. He is very heavily medicated, and whenever his parents have gone to visit him, they have described him as a zombie. It is also said that Anatoly is repeatedly beaten up by the other inmates or the other patients at the psychiatric unit and also hospital staff. And every application for Anatoly's release has been denied. In 2016, Anatoly also requested that he was able to marry his 25-year-old girlfriend. However, that was denied. And don't even ask me how Anatoly has a 25-year-old girlfriend. How does he even have a girlfriend anyway? I don't know. He shouldn't really be allowed to talk to anybody. And it was thought that Anatoly would be locked up in this psychiatric hospital for the rest of his life, that he would never be free to walk the graveyards of Russia ever again. However, I have an update for you, and this update was only from last year, 2022. A medical report was released that stated that there is no reason to hold Anatoly Moskvin in the psychiatric unit for any longer, and therefore Anatoly Moskvin can be released from the psychiatric unit at any point. And if he is released, he should either be released to live with a friend or in a care home. But obviously that was last year, and as far as I can tell, Anatoly is still being held in a psychiatric unit. But that is so terrifying that he could just be released at any moment. And understandably, the parents of the victims are terrified that he might one day get out, because not longer after Anatoly was originally arrested, he told officers to not bury the girls too deep, because as soon as he would be released, he was just going to dig them back up. Can you believe he said that? So I can understand why the parents of the victims are worried. He has said that he is going to go out and dig their children back up. However, in 2022, Anatoly is saying that he would not do this. And all he wants to do is be released, be a free person, marry his girlfriend, and work as a foreign languages tutor. And all I will say is that if Anatoly is released, I personally think that there needs to be conditions on his release. And the number one condition is that he should never, ever, ever be allowed to step foot in a graveyard ever again. And I personally think that he should also not be allowed anywhere near children, like near schools or playgrounds or anywhere that children congregate. He should not be allowed near children. And as for the victims of today's case, obviously we don't know the identities of most of the victims, but of course we do know the identity of one of the victims, which was Olga. And her mother, Natalia, has recently spoken out against Anatoly being released from the psychiatric unit. She has said that Anatoly should be locked up for the rest of his life, and it is not fair that Anatoly got to live with her daughter, Olga, for nearly 9 years, when she only got to live with her daughter for 10 years before she was tragically murdered. And what just makes this just a million times worse is that Natalia can see the psychiatric unit that Anatoly is in from her kitchen window. So every single time that she goes into her kitchen, it is a reminder of what he has done. But Natalia keeps a picture of Olga in the kitchen, and she talks to Olga every single day. And she thinks about the fact that Olga should be in her 30s now, and she wonders about the life that her daughter should have had. And I do just wish all of the families of the victims well. The trauma that they went through, what Anatoly needlessly put them through, is absolutely disgusting. So that brings us to the end of the case on Anatoly Moskvin, the human doll collector. And that is truly a case that sends a shiver down my spine. And I actually meant to mention this in the beginning of the video, but I have seen a couple of comments about my book of hexes and telling me to be careful with things like this. But guys, you don't need to worry. This is not real. It's not real. It's just Lights Lacquer. Like Lights Lacquer, the nail polish. This is just a PR box. Like, look. Not real. It's just nail polish. So that is the end of today's video. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Oh, and by the way, my nails, they are dark purple, if you can see. I have tried to match them to my lip. Like, can you see that? They are dark purple. Yeah, you can. They're not black. They do kind of match my lip. You know, sometimes it's hard to match my nails exactly to my makeup. Anyway, I feel like I am talking way too much at the end of this video. Thank you again to Love and Pies for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.